Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a textbook example of how a seemingly localized political dispute can just totally metastasize into an absolute national catastrophe. We're going to unpack the really tragic yet fascinating history of Nigeria's first republic. It was this period of immense, undeniable hope right after independence, but as you'll see, it rapidly unraveled into total chaos. So here's the core question we're tackling today. How exactly does a thriving, newly independent democracy collapse into fire, assassination, and military rule in just 6 short years? Well, we're going to trace the dominoes. We'll watch how they fall one by one, going from a single, bitter political rivalry all the way to the complete collapse of a nation's civilian government. Part 1. The First Republic Falls. Okay, picture this. It's the morning of January 15th, 1966. This is the exact moment the high stakes and, honestly, the deep fragility of Nigeria's political landscape were laid bare for the entire world to see. In a matter of hours, a violently executed military putsch claimed exactly 22 lives. We're talking the Prime Minister, Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, as well as the immensely powerful regional premiers of the North and the West, plus several senior military officers. Just like that, in a flash, the civilian government was completely shattered. But, how did Africa's pride, a true beacon of post-colonial democratic hope, descend into all this bloodshed? Section 2. The Action Group Split. To really understand how the nation cracked, we have to rewind a bit back to 1962, to a deep fracture right inside the ruling party of Nigeria's prosperous western region. This split brilliantly illustrates the massive personality and ideological clash that broke the Yoruba political landscape. So, on one side, you have Chief Obafemi Awolowo. He's the revered founder of the Action Group Party, who actually stepped down as regional premier to become the federal opposition leader. Awolowo favored these socialist-leaning policies, and he fiercely opposed the northern-dominated central government. But on the flip side was his deputy, Samuel Ladoke Akintola, who took over as the western premier. Now, Akintola favored a much more conservative approach. He believed in pragmatically building a national coalition with the northern establishment. Now, the absolutely crucial point here is that this wasn't just some polite, closed-door political disagreement. No, this was a total fracture. When Akintola was expelled from the party, it literally led to violent physical clashes right inside the Western House of Assembly. I mean, lawmakers were actually throwing chairs at each other. In response, the federal government swoops in, declares a state of emergency, and completely sidelines the regional government. And shortly after that, Awolowo himself was arrested and controversially slapped with a 10-year prison sentence for treasonable felony. So essentially, the whole region was officially split into these bitter, deeply suspicious rival camps. Part 3. The Wild, Wild West. Now, let's trace the escalation. We're going to watch how a spark of political rivalry turns into an absolute raging fire of electoral chaos and extreme civilian violence. So, late 1964, massive irregularities led to a total boycott of the federal elections by opposition alliances. Then, fast forward to October 1965. The Western regional elections happen, and they were widely condemned as blatantly rigged in favor of Akintola's new party. Opposition candidates were physically locked out, and ballot boxes were openly stuffed. Obviously, this completely destroyed public trust. Opposition supporters basically decided they had zero legal recourse left, which unfortunately set the stage for some horrific systemic violence. And what happened next was a visceral and honestly a deeply terrifying reality. The uprising became widely known as Operation Wetie, derived from the Yoruba phrase meaning soak it or drench it. This was a highly coordinated campaign of intense political violence. Political thugs and incredibly angry mobs started targeting Akintola's supporters. They would douse their opponents, their vehicles, even their homes in petrol, and then just set them completely ablaze. Drench your enemy in petrol and set him ablaze. This incredibly grim command was brutally enforced across the entire region. Mobs were turning neighbors against neighbors in what was basically a campaign of sheer terror. And the federal government, under Prime Minister Balewa, well, they refused to declare a state of emergency this time around. Lacking the actual troop numbers and the unified loyalty needed to suppress the riots, the state simply failed to stop the anarchy. They essentially just left the West to burn. The breakdown of law and order here was absolute. Official tallies cited over 160 deaths, but press and opposition estimates actually exceeded 700.
I mean, that massive gap between the official count and the reality on the ground tells you everything you need to know about how completely out of control the situation was. And the economic destruction? Equally devastating. Entire cocoa farms, which were literally the lifeblood of the region's economy, were incinerated. The government tried to slap curfews on suburbs like Mushin and Ikija, but roaming mobs completely ignored them. Regional commerce was totally paralyzed. The violence overwhelmed local police, laying bare the severe impotence of the federal government.
Section 4. The January Boys Strike. So, with civilian institutions completely paralyzed by the Operation Wetie crisis and public faith in the democratic process utterly shattered, the military decided it was time to step in. A group of university-educated young army majors, who became known as the January Boys, plotted a national revolution. Led by officers like Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogwu and Emmanuel Efeajuna, they looked at the anarchy in the West, they looked at the corruption of the political class, and they cited the need to, quote, clean the Augean stables of corrupt politicians who were running the country aground. Basically, they used the electoral chaos as their primary justification to overthrow the state. Now, even though this was intended to be a swift national revolution, the actual execution of the coup on January 15th was incredibly bloody and very uneven. In the north, Nzeogwu assassinated the powerful northern premier Amadou Bello. Down in Lagos, Efeajuna arrested Prime Minister Balawe, who was tragically found dead later on. Over in Ibadan, Emmanuel Nwabosi executed the western premier Akintola. But here is the crucial misstep. The plotters failed to neutralize the head of the army, General Aguiyi Ironsi, in Lagos, meaning they ultimately failed to secure complete control of the country. Let's look at the data here. When you actually look closely at who was killed, it immediately explains why this sparked such intense controversy. You have the top northern leaders and the western premier assassinated. But out of all the high-profile casualties, only one, Quartermaster General Arthur Unigbe, was of Igbo origin. So naturally, this stark demographic disparity instantly generated incredibly deep ethnic suspicion across what was already a highly fractured nation. So while the young majors claimed these were purely nationalistic motives, other ethnic groups evaluated the facts on the ground and very quickly labeled it an Igbo coup. And you can see why they think that. Top Igbo politicians, including the president and the eastern premier, survived entirely untouched. Plus, the coup was officially foiled by General Ironsi, an Igbo man, who then took control of the government. And to top it off, shortly after taking power, Ironsi enacted a unification decree that abolished the regional powers that had historically been favored by the North and West. For many Nigerians at the time, all these facts added up to what deeply felt like a targeted ethnic power grab. But wait, there is a very crucial counter-perspective we need to cover. Plotters like Major Adewale Ademoyega, who, it's important to note, was himself a Yoruba man, vehemently denied any ethnic motivations. He later wrote that their targets were chosen for purely political reasons. They basically wanted to eliminate the people they felt were directly responsible for the nation's corruption and the horrible violence in the West. He insisted their views were entirely national, their goals were idealistic, and they were trying to save Nigeria, not conquer it for one specific group. Section 5. Legacy of the Ashes. Regardless of what the plotters' true internal intentions really were, just the mere perception of ethnic bias set the stage for some truly tragic retaliation. The acting civilian president formally handed power over to the military. Major General Johnson Aguiyi Ironsi established the Supreme Military Council, which officially suspended the Constitution. In that moment, that began a long, dark stretch of 13 years of uninterrupted military rule. The First Republic was officially dead. It proved, with devastating finality, that unchecked intra-party political rivalry, when combined with blatant electoral fraud, can completely erode a nation's democratic foundation until it simply collapses under its own weight. So, I'll leave you to consider this provocative thought. When electoral integrity is compromised and partisan violence goes completely unchecked, just how fragile are our democratic institutions? What happened in Nigeria's western region isn't just history, folks. It's a really stark warning about exactly what happens when public trust in the ballot box is destroyed. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the world around you, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.